Captain Corvin's 3 hearts hammered against his chitinous chest as he watched the human vessel drift toward the Nexus station. Every rational thought in his crystalline mind screamed that this was madness. The humans had been warned, repeatedly, emphatically, with visual aids and mathematical proofs, that their fragile organic shells couldn't survive deep space. Yet here they came, crammed into metal coffins that any civilized species would reject as death traps. Station control to approaching Earth vessel Resolute Dawn, Corvin transmitted, his voice crackling through the quantum relay. You are advised to maintain minimum safe distance. Our medical bay is not equipped for biological failures. The response came in that peculiar human dialect they called English, delivered with an accent that somehow managed to sound both humble and defiant. Acknowledged. Station control. Commander Azalea Vance requesting docking permission for diplomatic contact. We appreciate the concern, but we're here to stay. Corvin's compound eyes focused on the primitive craft, where Nexus ships gleamed with protective quantum shields and redundant life support systems spanning multiple dimensions. The human vessel appeared to be held together by welds, and what his translator unhelpfully identified as grit. 3 humans were visible through the observation port, their pink, vulnerable faces pressed against transparent aluminum that wouldn't stop a micrometeor. Commander Vance, Corvin tried again, our deep space protocols exist for good reason. The radiation levels alone should have killed your crew 7 parsecs ago. Your ship lacks even basic quantum shielding. That's correct, Station Control, came the reply. But we figured something out that your protocols might not account for. Which is? A pause. Then almost casually, we don't quit. The words sent an involuntary shiver through Corvin's carapace. In the 3 centuries since the Galactic Nexus had formed, they'd encountered 847 species. Some were brilliant, some were ancient, some commanded technologies that bent reality itself. But none, absolutely none, had ever voluntarily chosen to face the cosmos in vessels that offered little more protection than atmospheric entry pods. Permission to dock, Vance repeated. We have something to discuss with the Council. Corvin's superior, Administrator Prax, materialized beside him in a shimmer of displaced photons. The ethereal's form was barely solid, existing primarily as organized energy patterns that could phase through solid matter at will. Corvin, surely you're not considering— They made it this far, Corvin interrupted. Look at their trajectory logs. They've been traveling for 8 standard months through the Maelstrom sector. That region has claimed ships from 12 different species in the past year alone. Prax's energy field pulsed with skepticism. Impossible. Their technology is centuries behind standard Nexus requirements. Yet they're here. Corvin watched as the human ship aligned itself with the docking mechanism, a maneuver that required precision within micrometers. The humans executed it perfectly, despite using manual controls instead of AI-assisted navigation. Administrator, I recommend we grant the docking request. The insurance implications alone are irrelevant if they're already dead, Corvin pointed out. But they're not dead. They're here, asking to talk. In my experience, when someone survives the impossible, it's worth hearing what they have to say. Through the station's sensors, he watched Commander Vance move about her ship with practiced efficiency, checking systems that should have failed weeks ago. Her 2 companions, a tall male with intricate markings on his dark skin, and a compact female whose hair had been cropped close to her skull, worked alongside her with the fluid coordination of a crew that had faced death together and emerged stronger. These humans had seen the warnings, understood the risks, and chosen to climb aboard their metal coffins anyway. They'd stared into the infinite dark between stars, the same dark that drove Nexus crews to madness despite their advanced shielding, and somehow found the will to continue. What kind of species, Corvin wondered, chooses hope over safety, the Nexus Grand Council Chamber stretched across 7 dimensions, its crystalline walls reflecting the assembled delegates in infinite fractals. Representatives from the core worlds sat in their environmental pods, the gaseous Nimbari floating in their clouded spheres, the silicon-based Korthak radiating heat from their mineral forms, the energy beings of Solareth pulsing with controlled, stellar fire. Commander Vance stood in the center, still wearing her pressure suit despite the chamber's life support accommodating her biological needs. Her companions, Dr. Khaleesi Prem and engineer Tomas Huanca, flanked her with the quiet confidence of people who had already survived their worst-case scenario. The humans request permission to establish trade routes through Nexus space, announced Counselor Yith, her melodic tones carrying across multiple frequency ranges. The crystalline delegate's form sparkled with barely contained skepticism. "This is unprecedented. Unprecedented and inadvisable," rumbled Counselor Gem, his rocky voice causing harmonic resonances throughout the chamber. "Their species lacks the fundamental technologies for safe passage. We would be enabling their extinction." Vance stepped forward, her boots clicking against the energy-formed floor. "With respect, counselors, we're already here. We didn't ask. Permission to travel through the Maelstrom sector, and we didn't wait for your approval to survive it." A ripple of unease passed through the assembled delegates. The Maelstrom was legendary. A region of space where reality itself became unstable, where ships equipped with the most advanced Nexus technology ventured only in heavily armed convoys. "Commander," Counselor Yith's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. "Our records indicate that your species achieved faster-than-light travel only recently. Your ships lack quantum coherence fields, dimensional anchors, or even basic psionic dampeners. How did you navigate the Maelstrom's reality storms?" "Doctor," Prem answered, her voice steady despite addressing beings that could unmake stars. "We didn't navigate around them. We went through them." The chamber fell silent. Even the Solareth stopped their pulsing. "Impossible," whispered Counselor Nex, the ethereal's energy form flickering with disbelief. "The Maelstrom's reality distortions would shred unprotected consciousness. Your organic brains should have been reduced to quantum foam. Several of our crew did suffer what we termed reality sickness," Engineer Huanca admitted, his words measured and precise. "Hallucinations, temporal displacement sensations, existential vertigo. But we developed countermeasures." "What countermeasures?" demanded Gem. Vance smiled, an expression that translated poorly across species but somehow conveyed both humor and determination. "We told stories. Stories. During the worst reality storms, when our instruments couldn't distinguish between past and future, when space itself seemed to forget what distance meant, we gathered in the ship's central bay and told stories. Stories about Earth, about our families, about who we were and why we were out here. We anchored ourselves to narrative truth when physical truth became negotiable." Counselor Yith's crystalline form chimed with what might have been laughter. "You used fiction as a shield against cosmic forces?" "Not fiction," Dr. Prem corrected. "Memory. Identity. The things that make us who we are don't require quantum coherence to exist. They're carried in our minds, our cultures, our connections to each other. When reality tried to erase us, we reminded it, and ourselves, that we had every right to be here. The implications hung in the air like a challenge. The Nexus species had conquered the galaxy through superior technology, careful planning, and risk mitigation. They built bigger shields, stronger hulls, more sophisticated AI systems. When faced with cosmic threats, they engineered their way around the problem. The humans had simply refused to be erased. "This is all very poetic," Counselor Gem grumbled, "but sentiment doesn't protect against hard vacuum or gamma radiation. Your crew should be dead a dozen times over." "You're probably right," Vance agreed. "We calculated the odds before we left Earth. Statistically, we had about a 0.3% chance of reaching Nexus space alive. Then why attempt it? Because 0.3% isn't zero. Her voice carried across the vast chamber with quiet intensity. Every percentage point matters when you're fighting for the future of your species. We didn't come out here because we thought it was safe. We came because someone has to be first. The chamber filled with the harmonics of multiple species conferring amongst themselves. The humans waited, still and patient, as beings of vast intelligence and experience grappled with the fundamental challenge they represented. 3 Standard. Days later, the Resolute Dawn hung in space beside the Nexus research vessel Infinite Precision, a gleaming testament to 10,000 years of technological advancement. The research ship's captain, a methodical being named Vrix from the Cognition Collective, had volunteered to escort the humans through a simple trade route survey, mostly, the Council suspected, to document their inevitable failure. Humans, Vrix transmitted, his voice carrying the characteristic harmonic undertones of his species. We are approaching the Kelvin Nebula. Standard protocol requires a 2-day detour around the Ion Storm complex. Your ship will need to maintain formation. Commander Vance's response crackled through the comm with typical human directness. Negative infinite precision. Our scans show a clear path through the nebula's center. Transit time, 4 hours instead of 2 days. The silence stretched long, enough for light to travel several thousand kilometers. Commander, Vrix finally replied, the ion storms in that nebula have been classified as catastrophic-level phenomena. Ships have been lost in there. How many ships? Asked Dr. Prem over the channel. 17 vessels over the past century, all equipped with full Nexus safety protocols. And how many of those ships were trying to go through the center? Engineer. Huanca's voice joined the conversation. Another pause. Vrix's crew could be heard consulting their databases. None. All followed standard bypass protocols. So nobody's actually tested whether the center is passable, Vance observed. They just assumed it wasn't. Through the quantum-encrypted command channel, Vrix conferred with his science officer, a crystalline entity whose thoughts moved at near light speed. The analysis was instantaneous and devastating. The humans were proposing to fly directly through a phenomenon that Nexus scientists had declared unsurvivable based on theoretical models. Commander Vance, Vrix said carefully, our computer projections indicate a 97.6% probability of total system failure if you attempt that route. What about the 2.4%? The what? You said 97.6% chance of failure. That leaves 2.4% chance of success. Those aren't bad odds considering we made it here on 0.3%. Vrix's ship sensors tracked the Resolute Dawn as it began moving toward the nebula's heart, its crude chemical thrusters leaving visible exhaust trails against the cosmic background. The human ship looked like an antique compared to the Infinite Precision, its hull bearing the scars of micrometeorite impacts and radiation exposure. They're actually doing it, whispered his science officer. The nebula opened before them like a tunnel of living lightning. Ion storms that could strip electrons from atoms danced in spirals around the ships, while electromagnetic pulses strong enough to fry quantum processors fired in random bursts. The Infinite Precision held position. At the nebula's edge, its advanced sensors tracking the human ship's suicidal plunge into the maelstrom. Resolute Dawn! Report status, Vrix called. Hull temperature rising, but within acceptable parameters, came Vance's steady voice. Minor electrical fluctuations. Navigation is manual, but Tomas is handling it. Khaleesi's monitoring the crew for ion poisoning. Any signs of system failure? Define failure, Huanca's voice cut through the static. Half our electronics are fried, but the important bits are still working. Turns out redundancy beats sophistication when things get ugly. The Infinite Precision's sensors watched in disbelief as the primitive human craft threaded its way through ion storms that should have been instantly lethal. Where Nexus ships relied on energy shields to deflect danger, the humans seemed to absorb punishment and keep functioning. Their ship's hull actually conducted some of the electrical discharge safely away from critical systems, a side effect of their crude construction methods that accidentally provided protection against phenomena that had never been considered. 2 hours to nebula exit, Dr. Prem reported. Radiation levels are elevated but manageable. We're getting some interesting particle readings that might explain why nobody's tried this route before. Explain. The ion storms create a natural deflection field in the nebula's center. Most of the really dangerous radiation gets channeled away from the core passage. Your people probably saw the outer storms and assumed the whole nebula was uniform, but it's not. There's a calm eye, like a hurricane. Vrix's science officer ran rapid calculations. The humans were right. Theoretical models had assumed uniform distribution of hazardous phenomena, but the nebula's actual structure created a navigable corridor that had been invisible to long-range scans. "Infinite precision," Vance called. "Are you planning to follow us through, or do you want to take the scenic route and meet us on the other side in 2 days?" It was a challenge wrapped in an invitation, delivered with the casual confidence of a species that had decided the universe's dangers were problems to be solved rather than obstacles to be avoided. News of the nebula transit spread through Nexus, space like wildfire through dry tinder. Within a standard week, the incident had been analyzed, debated, and dissected by xenobiologists, engineers, and philosophers across 17 different star systems. The implications were staggering. A primitive species had accomplished something that the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had declared impossible. Captain Corvin found himself reassigned to the Frontier Analysis Division, tasked with studying what Nexus Command was calling the human anomaly. His new office aboard the Deep Space Monitoring Station Watchtower Prime offered a view of the shipping lanes where human vessels had begun to appear with disturbing regularity. "Another one," announced his aide, a young ethereal named Quen whose energy form flickered with nervous patterns. "The Prairie Wind just completed transit through the Scorpion Gate." Corvin activated the holographic display, watching as a human freighter emerged from a hyperspace corridor that had been considered too unstable for regular use. The ship's hull showed the characteristic scarring of vessels that had survived. Multiple encounters with cosmic hazards, yet its crew reported no casualties and minimal system damage. "That's the third impossible route they've pioneered this month," Corvin observed. "What's their secret?" "According to our embedded observers, they're not doing anything revolutionary," Quen replied, his form solidifying as he focused on the data. "Same crude technology, same biological limitations. They just keep going." The door chimed, and Commander Vance entered with her characteristic direct stride. Her diplomatic status granted her access to most Nexus facilities, a privilege she'd been using to study galactic trade routes with an intensity that worried several council members. "Captain Corvin," she nodded. "Mind if I take a look at your shipping manifests? I'm trying to understand why certain sectors are marked as no-go zones." Corvin gestured to the holo display. "Most of those restrictions exist for good reason, Commander. The Nexus learned through bitter experience which regions of space are too dangerous for regular traffic." "Define too dangerous," Vance said, echoing Engineer Huanca's question from the Nebula incident. "I see probability matrices, risk assessments, and computer models, but I don't see any recent actual attempts." "Because actual attempts tend to result in lost ships and dead crews." Vance studied the display, her fingers tracing routes that connected previously isolated systems. "What if they don't have to? Look at this. The void lanes between the Centauri cluster and the outer reaches. Your data shows it's been designated as impassable for 3 centuries because of dark matter concentrations." "Correct. Dark matter interferes with quantum coherence fields, making navigation impossible." "For your ships," Vance agreed, "but we don't use quantum coherence fields. We navigate by stellar positioning and gravitational mapping. Dark matter doesn't affect either of those. Quen's energy form pulsed with sudden understanding. You're proposing to use the void lanes as a trade route. I'm proposing to test them. If they're passable, they'd cut transit time between the Centauri cluster and outer reaches from 6 weeks to 8 days. That's not just a commercial advantage, it's a strategic one. Corvin felt his 3 hearts accelerate. The human was right, of course. The Nexus had developed such sophisticated safety protocols that they'd effectively blocked themselves out of vast regions of space. Meanwhile, the human's primitive technology was proving immune to hazards that sophisticated systems couldn't handle. "Commander," he said carefully, "even if the void lanes are technically navigable, the insurance costs alone are irrelevant if nobody else can use the route," Vance finished. "Captain, in 1 month, human ships have opened 3 previously impassable corridors. We're not trying to compete with Nexus technology. We're accessing parts of the galaxy that your technology can't reach." The implications crystallized with terrifying clarity. The humans weren't just surviving their journey through space, they were mapping new territories. Every impossible route they conquered expanded their reach while leaving Nexus ships locked into increasingly inefficient traditional corridors. "There's something else," Vance continued, activating her own datapad. "We've been monitoring Nexus shipping patterns. Your trade routes haven't been optimized in over a century. You're following the same paths your ancestors marked as safe, even though the hazards they were avoiding might not exist anymore." She was right. Corvin realized with growing unease that Nexus civilization had become so focused on avoiding risks that they'd stopped questioning whether those risks were still valid. They'd built an entire galactic infrastructure around the premise that space was fundamentally hostile and that survival required maximum technological superiority. The humans had started from the opposite assumption. Space was dangerous, but it was also navigable if you were willing to accept risk as the price of discovery. "What do you want from us?" Corvin asked. "Partnership," Vance replied without hesitation. "You have the infrastructure, the established trade networks, the diplomatic connections. We have the ability to go places you can't. Together, we could open up regions of the galaxy that have been dark for millennia." It was either the most promising proposal Corvin had heard in decades, or the most terrifying. The crisis began in the tertiary arm, where human merchant vessels had been steadily expanding their operations through previously unexplored sectors. The Wandering Star, captained by a methodical woman named Lixia Noor, had been conducting routine surveys of abandoned systems when they encountered something that changed everything. "Nexus Control, this is Captain Noor aboard the Wandering Star." Her voice crackled through quantum relay across 12 parsecs. "We've discovered something in the Gast system that requires immediate attention." Captain Corvin, now serving as primary human liaison, felt his stomach drop at the tension in her voice. "Report, Captain." "We've found survivors." The simple statement sent shockwaves through the Nexus communication network. The Gast system had been evacuated 4 centuries ago when a quantum plague had rendered it uninhabitable to all known forms of life. It was considered a dead zone, a monument to one of the galaxy's greatest disasters. "Survivors from what?" Corvin asked, though he dreaded the answer. "The original evacuation. They've been here the whole time." Dr. Prem's voice joined the transmission. "Corvin, you need to understand, these aren't just any survivors. They're Nimbari families who've been living in the quantum-infected regions for 400 years. They've adapted." The implications hit like a physical blow. The Nimbari were one of the Nexus's founding species, gaseous beings of incredible intelligence who required precise environmental conditions to survive. If they were alive in the Gast system, it meant the uninhabitable designation had been wrong for centuries. "That's impossible," came another voice, Administrator Prax, phasing into the communication from his office on Nexus Prime. "The quantum plague destroys neural coherence in gaseous species. The Nimbari couldn't survive there." "With respect, Administrator," Captain Noor replied, They're floating right outside my viewport. I can patch you through to their elder if you'd like to tell him he's impossible." Within hours, the revelation had reached the highest levels of Nexus government. Emergency sessions were called, scientific expeditions dispatched, and historical records frantically re-examined. The humans had stumbled across one of the galaxy's greatest mysteries and solved it simply by being willing to go where everyone else had declared off-limits. The Nimbari survivors told a story that recontextualized 4 centuries of galactic history. The quantum plague hadn't destroyed their neural coherence. It had forced them to evolve new forms of consciousness that were immune to quantum interference. They'd been trying to signal the outside galaxy for decades, but their transmissions couldn't penetrate the quantum static that surrounded their system. "We thought you had abandoned us," Elder Vimth explained during the first official contact session. His gaseous form swirled with patterns of communication that older Nimbari had thought extinct. "When the human ship appeared, we could hardly believe it. They came through zones that we were told would kill any ship instantly." Commander Vance, present for the historic meeting, asked the question that everyone was thinking: how many other systems have been written off prematurely? The answer came from an exhaustive review of Nexus historical records. 47 systems marked as uninhabitable or impassable based on theoretical models rather than recent exploration. 47 systems that might contain survivors, resources, or simply new paths through the galaxy that had been ignored for centuries. But the revelation also triggered a crisis of confidence that threatened to tear the Nexus apart. Species that had spent millennia believing in the superiority of careful planning and technological solutions suddenly faced evidence that their approach had blinded them to entire regions of possibility. "The humans are making us look like cowards," complained Counselor Gem during an emergency session. "Every week brings news of another impossible achievement. How long before our own populations start questioning why we've been so conservative, Counselor?" Yeath's crystalline form chimed with harmonics of deep concern. "The issue isn't cowardice, it's methodology. We prioritize the preservation of existing life over the exploration of new possibilities. The humans appear to have inverted that priority." "With catastrophic results for individual crew members," pointed out Counselor Nex. "Their casualty rates are orders of magnitude higher than ours. But their discovery rates are also orders of magnitude higher," Vance interjected from the gallery. "You've built a civilization that's incredibly good at maintaining the status quo. We've built a culture that's incredibly good at changing it." The chamber fell silent as the delegates grappled with an uncomfortable truth. The humans weren't succeeding despite their primitive technology and dangerous methods. They were succeeding because of them. Their willingness to accept risk had become a strategic advantage that the Nexus's advanced safety protocols couldn't match. "What do you propose?" Counselor Yeath asked finally. Vance stood, her simple pressure suit a stark contrast to the environmental pods and energy forms surrounding her. "Joint expeditions. Your ships provide the infrastructure and safety nets. Our ships provide the pathfinding and first contact protocols. Together, we map the parts of the galaxy that both our species have been missing." 2 years later, Captain Corvin stood on the observation deck of the Harmony Forge, watching as human and Nexus vessels worked in perfect coordination to establish humanity's first permanent deep space station. The hybrid facility, built in the previously impassable Dark Nebula, represented something unprecedented in galactic history. A construction project that required both species' unique capabilities to succeed. The humans had mapped the route through the nebula's quantum maze, navigating by instinct and stubborn determination through passages that sophisticated sensors couldn't detect. The Nexus had provided the construction technology and life support systems that could function in the nebula's exotic environment. Neither species could have accomplished it alone. Status report. Corvin requested from his aide, Quen, whose energy form had stabilized considerably since their first encounter with human impossibilities. "Station construction is ahead of schedule," Quen reported, his voice carrying notes of genuine enthusiasm. The human engineering teams have developed 17 new techniques for working in quantum unstable environments. Our construction AIs have learned to incorporate their improvisation protocols into their planning matrices. Through the viewport, Corvin watched Commander Vance and her team coordinating with the Nimbari construction supervisor, whose gaseous form danced around the station's growing superstructure. The sight would have been impossible to imagine just a few years ago. Species that had barely known of each other's existence now working together to build something that expanded the boundaries of what any of them thought possible. Incoming. Transmission from Earth, Quen announced. Priority channel. The holographic display activated, revealing a woman whose bearing marked her as someone accustomed to making decisions that affected entire worlds. Fleet Admiral Esperanza del Rio, the architect of humanity's expansion into Nexus space, had become the unofficial ambassador for what the galaxy was starting to call the human doctrine, the philosophy that declared no destination unreachable if someone was willing to accept the risks involved. Captain Corvin, Admiral Del Rio nodded. I have news that will interest you. The Outer Rim expedition has made contact. Corvin's 3 hearts skipped in unison. The Outer Rim expedition was the most ambitious joint venture yet attempted, a fleet of human Pathfinder ships escorted by Nexus support vessels, heading for the galaxy's edge, where no organized exploration had ever been attempted. They'd been out of communication for 6 months, presumed lost by many Nexus officials. They found something, Del Rio continued, an entire cluster of inhabited systems that our long-range surveys missed. New species, new technologies, new ways of looking at the universe. But more importantly, they found evidence of something else. The Admiral's expression grew serious. There are other galaxies out there, Captain. Other galactic communities. And according to the entities our expedition encountered, we're not the only ones who've been playing it safe. Most galactic civilizations follow the same pattern. Develop advanced technology, establish safety protocols, gradually limit their exploration to acceptable risks. But not all of them? Corvin asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Not all of them. There are what they call wanderer cultures, species that prioritize exploration over security, discovery over safety. They're rare, but they're out, there. And according to our new contacts, they're the ones who maintain contact between galaxies. The implications were staggering. Humanity's willingness to accept danger hadn't just opened new regions of their own galaxy, it had potentially connected them to an entire network of civilizations that spanned multiple galaxies. Admiral, Vance's voice joined the conversation from the station construction site. Are you saying we've stumbled into some kind of intergalactic community? I'm saying we've been invited to join one, Del Rio replied. But the invitation came with a warning. There are also predator cultures out there, species that use their willingness to accept risk for conquest rather than exploration. The Wanderer Network exists partly to watch for them and coordinate responses when they're detected. Corvin felt the weight of galactic history shifting around him. The humans hadn't just changed the Nexus, they'd connected both species to something vastly larger and more complex than anyone had imagined. What's our next step? He asked. Vance answered before the Admiral could respond. Same as it's always been, she said, her voice carrying across space with quiet confidence. We keep going. We keep exploring. We keep proving that the universe is bigger than anyone's list of limitations. Looking out at the growing space station, watching human and Nexus crews work together to build something that should have been impossible, Corvin realized that the real revolution hadn't been technological, it had been philosophical. The humans had taught the galaxy that the choice between safety and discovery was a false one. With the right partnerships, the right attitude, and the right willingness to face the unknown, both were possible. The universe was vast, dangerous, and full of wonders that no single species could reach alone. But together, combining human courage with Nexus wisdom, human adaptability with alien capabilities, they could go anywhere, and they would. The stars were calling, and for the first time in galactic history, both species were ready to answer.